I walked into my own home and caught my wife in bed with my brother. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and family collapsed. But what happened next? That's the part no one saw coming. Hey everyone, and thanks for stopping by to read what's been one of the most difficult stories of my life. Just last week, I spent several long days out of town on a business trip, trying to lock in deals with some of our major suppliers. Back home, my dad and my younger brother, Ted, stayed behind at our company's headquarters, a beautiful old red brick building that's been in our family for generations. We inherited it from my grandfather, who practically built the place with his bare hands. Growing up, my brothers and I were constantly reminded of how he started this company from nothing, just a small workshop where he personally pieced together machines one by one. Over the years, that little operation turned into something pretty solid. Today we supply industrial equipment all over the state. Working alongside family has always been a bit of a double-edged sword, though. It's what gives us our edge, but it also brings its fair share of headaches. My dad, who's seen it all, still runs a tight ship. He's the kind of man who believes in keeping every detail under control. Ted, on the other hand, brings this youthful spark, full of fresh marketing ideas, though sometimes a little too eager to take risks. Me. I usually play the middleman, the guy who tries to keep things steady. I'm always balancing my dad's old-school caution with Ted's go-getter attitude. Just before I left for the trip, the three of us had one of our usual strategy sessions in the office. We sat around that old conference table for hours, hashing out our plans for the next few months. Dad was pushing to broaden our offerings. He wanted to start producing gear for construction businesses. I was more hesitant. We haven't even completed the rollout of our last product line, I reminded him, flipping through our supply charts. Jumping into a whole new market too fast might backfire. We could lose the clients we just worked so hard to secure. Across from me, Ted was sipping coffee and, true to form, jumping at the chance to pitch another bold move. But if we don't adapt, we'll fall behind, he argued. Just look at how many startups popped up this past year alone. I noticed Dad giving Ted a nod, clearly warming to the idea. That meant I had to hold my ground even firmer, which I've gotten used to over the years. Finding the right balance between ambition and patience has kind of become my unofficial job, making sure we build toward the future without rushing into anything half-baked. In the end, we settled on a plan. I'd head out and meet with some potential partners, hoping to lock in long-term supply deals. If things went well, it would give us the stability we needed to keep the business running smooth for the next year. That night, as I was driving back from one of those meetings, the highway ahead was mostly quiet, the sky turning a deep indigo as the last light faded. That's when I noticed them, three figures standing off to the side where the road meets the edge of the woods. Their silhouettes were sharp against the darker backdrop of trees. One of the men seemed to be barking orders, his arms slicing through the air with intensity. But what froze me was the girl. She had on a light jacket, and something in her body language screamed distress. She was twisting, trying to pull away from whoever had hold of her. Something about the whole scene set off every alarm in my head. This wasn't right. Not even close. What in the world are you walking into? I mumbled, easing off the gas pedal as instinct kicked in. I brought the car to a stop a bit down the road, keeping enough distance to stay out of immediate sight. I called the dispatcher and explained what I was seeing. She told me to stay on the line, but deep down I already knew I wasn't going to wait. Once I hung up, I reached over and opened the glove box. The only thing inside that resembled a weapon was a small adjustable wrench. Not ideal, but it was better than going in empty-handed. "All right, old man," I muttered under my breath, steeling myself. "No dumb moves tonight." I took a deep breath, pushed open the car door and stepped into the chill night air. It cut through my coat and stung my skin, keeping me sharp. I eased the door shut behind me without a sound and started walking toward the group. Every step I took, I prayed the police would show up soon. But I knew the most important thing right now was not to show fear. If they caught even a hint of hesitation, this could get bad, fast. I approached calmly and said, "Just passing through. Saw something odd. Thought maybe someone needed help." One of the men turned toward me, his body tightening. "We don't need any," he snapped, stepping closer. He was shorter but stocky, his stance rigid and aggressive, like a guy who didn't mind settling things the hard way. His fists were already clenched. I flicked my eyes toward the girl. She was shaking but still on her feet. Her face was pale, her breathing uneven. She didn't move, but her eyes were wide and locked onto mine, searching. I walked slowly toward her, slipping the wrench into my coat pocket as I did. I kept my voice low, gentle. "You okay?" She gave a quick nod, but she still hadn't found her voice. I stood there, just trying to make her feel a little safer. Then, after a few moments, she finally steadied herself enough to speak. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Thank you." For a moment I thought it was all over. Far off in the distance, I spotted the flashing red and blue lights of a police cruiser. A wave of relief swept through me so strong it almost made my knees weak. Within minutes, 2 officers had arrived, stepping out of their car with flashlights slicing through the dark. They moved in quickly, their beams cutting across the scene as they took control. Once things had calmed down, the girl, who still hadn't said much, turned to me quietly and asked, "Could you take me to the city? That's where I need to go." I nodded and we both got into my car. As I pulled back onto the highway, she sat stiffly beside me, wrapped in silence. Her posture was tight, as if she was holding herself together by sheer will, terrified that even small talk might somehow reopen the trauma she'd just escaped. I didn't press her. I figured what she needed most in that moment was space to breathe, to begin piecing herself back together. After a few minutes, she finally spoke up, her voice still fragile. "My name's Linda. Thank you for stopping." "If you hadn't," her words drifted off, and her face tightened like the memory alone was too much to say out loud. I glanced over at her and said gently, "It's okay, Linda. You're safe now." But I was wrong. It wasn't over, not yet. Just as I stepped out of the car to stretch my legs at a roadside stop, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and there they were. One of the guys from earlier, the broad-shouldered one who'd been giving orders, stood just a few feet away, sneering. "Well, look who thought he'd played the hero," he growled, his voice thick with venom. "You really think this is done? You're gonna wish you'd kept driving." "Back off," I said firmly, standing my ground. "She hasn't done anything to deserve this. Let her go." "She's not your problem," snapped the shorter one, the one who looked like he'd spent years getting into fights and never learning from any of them. "Her daddy owes us big. She's ours now. We'll have her hooked in no time. She'll fall in line." My stomach twisted at the way he said it, so casual, like she was just some object they could own and break. Then it happened. One of them lunged for me. I ducked and twisted away, but before I could react, another guy I hadn't even seen landed a brutal punch to my lower back. Pain exploded through my spine and nearly dropped me, but I bit down hard and refused to fall. I grabbed the small bat I kept tucked under the seat, just in case, and swung hard, catching one of them right on the knee. He screamed and crumpled onto the pavement, howling in pain. The leader roared in fury and charged. But just before he reached me, I heard the engine behind us roar to life. Linda had slipped into the driver's seat and hit the gas. "Get in," she yelled. I didn't hesitate. I jumped in, slamming the door behind me as she tore away from the scene. We sped down the empty road, but the adrenaline wasn't gone yet, it had only changed shape. It coiled in my chest like a rope pulled too tight. In the rearview mirror, I saw headlights pop back into view. That old SUV was barreling after us, bouncing across the cracked pavement like a monster that just wouldn't die. "They're gaining on us again," Linda cried, gripping the wheel so tight her knuckles were turning pale. "Stay calm," I said, though my voice didn't quite carry the confidence I hoped for. "Just hold on," I told her, though honestly I was barely holding it together myself. "See that bend coming up? There's an old farm just past it. Take the turn, we'll figure out the rest from there." "Improvise?" she asked, her voice full of uncertainty. "Exactly," I said, tightening my grip on the seat. We didn't have a real plan, just a shot in the dark and a bit of hope. The SUV behind us vanished briefly from view as we turned off the main road and bounced down a narrow dirt path. We pulled up to the rundown farm, the silhouette of a large barn looming in the darkness like something out of a forgotten dream. We rushed inside just as we heard them behind us again, shouts, footsteps, the unmistakable command of the thug in charge, "Find them. They're close." Inside the barn, the air was thick with dust and decay. The smell of rotting wood and rust hit us immediately. In one dim corner, there were old broken-down tools, piles of scrap metal, and loose boards scattered across the floor. I spotted a length of iron pipe and grabbed it. Linda hesitated, just for a second, then snatched up a crowbar lying at her feet. "You okay?" I asked, glancing over. She looked petrified, her shoulders trembling, but her grip was solid on that crowbar. "Ready?" she said quickly, her voice shaky but determined. We both knew we didn't stand much of a chance. There were 3 of them. But I had to hold them off, buy her enough time to escape if it came to that. The barn doors burst open with a thunderous slam. A flashlight beam cut through the haze and then one of them stepped in. The first thug's eyes locked on me and he let out a crooked grin. "Well, look who decided to play hero," he said. "You think hiding in this dump is going to save you? I squared my stance, both hands gripping the pipe. "You should walk away while you still can," I said calmly, though my heart was pounding. "The cops are on their way. Won't be long now." "Oh, spare me the drama," the second one growled as he stepped in behind the first. Before I had time to think, the first guy lunged. I swung hard, the pipe connecting solidly with his knee. He screamed in pain and collapsed, clutching his leg as he writhed on the floor. "You're dead," bellowed the big one, charging forward with a knife in hand. I dodged to the side just in time, the blade slicing through my jacket but missing skin. I shoved him back with every ounce of strength I had. "Run, Linda," I shouted. But she didn't run. I heard the car engine roar back to life, tires crunching over gravel. She was behind the wheel again, headlights blazing through the barn door as she gunned it straight toward us. In that instant, I caught a glimpse of her face, her expression filled with a fierce, terrified courage. And for the first time that night, a faint smile crept across mine. I jumped in as she swung the car around, and together we tore back down the road, dust and fear trailing behind us. We hit the main road again and didn't stop. The city lights were still miles off, but they might as well have been salvation. That night changed both of us in ways we couldn't yet understand. But the one thing that mattered? We survived. We made it out. The hum of the engine became our only soundtrack as we drove beneath the silver glow of the moon. After a long silence, Linda finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, still shaky from everything we'd just been through. "Thank you for stopping back there. If it hadn't been for you..." She didn't need to finish. Some things don't need words. "I don't even want to think about how things used to be," Linda said softly as we drove, her voice distant, like she was seeing another world entirely. "When I was little, Dad used to lift me up into the back of his old pickup and we'd ride through the fields, checking on the crops. He used to laugh all the time. He was warm, gentle. Back then, we were happy." She stopped for a second, the silence stretching thin between us like a thread she was afraid to break. Then, with a quiet breath, she kept going. "But everything fell apart when I was 12. My mom passed away. Cancer. And Dad, he just couldn't hold himself together after that. At first he tried, he really did. He'd still make dinner, still ask how school was. But then he started drinking. Just a beer or two at night in the beginning. But it didn't stop there." Her voice didn't shake, but I could see the pain etched deep into her face. "Year after year he slipped further away. The drinking got worse. He became cold. Angry. And the farm, our home, it started crumbling along with him. He wasn't my dad anymore. Not really." She stared out the window, eyes full of something heavier than tears. "It's been like that ever since. Until I ran into you." I didn't know what to say. I was stunned by how steadily she told it all. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, but her eyes told the real story, a worn-out sorrow and exhaustion that didn't have words. After a long pause, I asked gently, "Do you have somewhere to go? Anyone you can call?" Linda slowly shook her head. "No. After Mom died, the rest of the family just disappeared. Said Dad was too much. And friends, well, they faded away too. There's no one left. I honestly don't know what I'm supposed to do." As the city lights began to glow ahead of us, I couldn't stop thinking about her words. About everything she'd endured. I knew I couldn't just drop her off and drive away. Not when danger still felt so close, like it was just around the corner waiting for her to be alone again. I couldn't let that happen. We crossed a narrow bridge over a dark river, and I pulled into a gas station to stretch my legs and grab a cup of coffee. We switched spots. This time I took the driver's seat. Linda curled up in the passenger seat, her body folded in on itself like she was trying to disappear. She looked completely spent. And not even 5 minutes after I pulled back onto the road, she was asleep. Just like that. As if her body had finally given itself permission to rest. The city crept closer. And just when I thought the chaos of the night was behind me, the real storm hit. I pulled into our driveway, the house lights still on. I figured I'd tuck Linda into the guest room, let her get some proper rest. But as I stepped inside, I heard it. Muffled sounds. Moaning. My whole body went still. And then, without thinking, without even processing what I was doing, I shoved the bedroom door open. Everything shattered. There they were. My wife. And my younger brother. In bed. Together. The second they saw me, they panicked, scrambling for the sheets, eyes wide with shock and shame. "Jason, wait, it's not what you think," my wife stammered, her face as pale as the moon. But I couldn't hear her. Couldn't see anything except my brother. His head hung low, eyes fixed on the floor. He looked so small. So pathetic. Like he didn't even have the strength to defend himself. It wasn't a mistake. It was a betrayal. A quiet, calculated betrayal that shattered everything in me. I could feel the fury rising in my chest, heavy and raw, barely contained behind clenched teeth. "You call this a mistake?" I said, my voice low and rough with rage. "You brought my brother into our home, into our bed. While I've been out there busting my back on the road, doing everything I can to keep this family running, you do this." Catherine couldn't even look at me. She just sat there, wrapped in the sheets, sobbing quietly. "It was just once," she whispered. I was lonely. I wasn't thinking." "Don't," I cut her off, my voice turning ice cold. "Just don't. Spare me the excuses, Catherine." I turned away from her and walked over to where my brother was still slumped on the floor, out cold from whatever had happened when I burst in. I knelt down beside him, checked his breathing. He was fine. Breathing steady. But everything inside me was unraveling. I stepped back, standing in the doorway like a stranger in my own home. I watched the two of them in silence, not angry anymore, just hollow. My thoughts were racing, but they all kept circling back to the same question. What now? How do you come back from betrayal like this? Eventually, Catherine got up and helped him out of the room. They didn't say a word. I didn't stop them. I followed them to the front door, opened it, and as they stepped out, I closed it behind them and locked it. Only then did I finally let my breath out. My hands were shaking. The adrenaline still pulsing through me like a storm. From downstairs, I heard a quiet voice call out, "John? Is everything okay?" I went down and found Linda standing at the foot of the stairs, eyes wide with concern. Before I could answer, I saw headlights through the window. My father's car. I watched as he got out, his steps quick and impatient. Moments later, he was standing in the doorway. "There are two people waiting outside," I said flatly. "Go with them if that's what you want." But he didn't listen. He brushed past me into the house, his gaze searching the room until it landed on Linda. And then he sneered. "So this is what it's about," he spat, his voice sharp with judgment. "This cheap little—" "That's enough," I snapped, my jaw tight, voice low and steady. "Watch your mouth." His eyes narrowed. "You throw your wife out? The mother of your children? For her? You have no idea what's going on right now," I said through gritted teeth. "If you can't speak with respect, you're leaving." He looked stunned. In all my life, I'd never stood up to him like that. I'd always been the one he could control, pressured into silence with a glare or a raised voice. But not today. Today I wasn't that man anymore. He stood there for a moment, jaw set. Then he raised his chin, gave me one last look filled with contempt. First at me, then at Linda. Without another word, he turned and walked out. A few seconds later, I heard the car door slam and his engine roar down the street, disappearing into the night. I let the silence settle before speaking again. "Upstairs," I said quietly to Linda. "Second door on the left. There should be something there you can wear." She gave a small nod, her expression soft with gratitude. "Thank you, John." I didn't say anything else. I just turned and walked away, heading back up the stairs. I passed by the bedroom, the one where just an hour earlier my life as I knew it had fallen apart. I couldn't stop seeing it, my wife and my brother tangled up in that moment that had shattered everything. The image kept flashing in my mind like a wound that refused to close. For a second I felt that old anger start to bubble up again. But I forced it down. Rage wouldn't fix anything now. No outburst, no screaming, no slamming of fists would undo what had been done. The damage was permanent. I headed downstairs to my study, the one place that had always been mine. The walls, lined with dark wood and shelves filled with books, had once brought me comfort. Now they felt cold, foreign. I sat there in silence, trying to hold myself together, but there was one thought that refused to let go. One thing that pierced deeper than betrayal or heartbreak. What if the kids aren't even mine? That fear, that ugly, paralyzing doubt, sank its claws into me. My children were the reason I worked so hard, the reason I endured long hours and hard days. They were my foundation, my compass. Even if the worst turned out to be true, I knew I couldn't just walk away from them. They were innocent, blameless. None of this was their fault. So I sat there, alone in that room, until the first light of morning crept through the curtains. I sifted through every memory, every smile, every lie. And slowly, something inside me began to settle. Tomorrow wouldn't be a continuation of the life I had known. Would be something new. But before I could move forward, I needed clarity. I needed answers, no matter how much they might hurt. I picked up the phone and called the nearest clinic. The voice on the other end was polite, professional. She scheduled me for a paternity test and said the results would take a few days. After hanging up, I walked back into the kitchen and decided to cook. It was the only thing I could control at that moment, something simple and grounding. I reached for the eggs and bacon, wanting to bring some sense of normalcy back, for the kids and for Linda, who was still asleep on the couch. But the calm didn't last long. There was a knock at the door, loud, urgent. Moments later, it was flung open, and police stepped inside with sharp, deliberate movements. "Step back, ma'am," one of the officers barked at Linda, who had stumbled in, confused and scared. "What's going on?" I asked, my hands half raised, stunned. "We have a statement and corroborating testimony," one of them said. "John, you need to come with us." I turned to Linda, trying to calm her through the whirlwind. "It's okay," I said softly. "Just look after the kids. Please." She started to shout something, her voice strained and panicked, but I didn't catch the words. The door slammed behind me, sealing me off from the only bit of peace I'd had left. They pushed me into the back of the patrol car. I didn't fight it. I just sat there, staring through the foggy window as the house disappeared behind us. Through the glass, I saw Linda standing on the porch, arms wrapped tightly around herself, watching the squad car fade down the road. Everything was gone now. Later I'd find out what came next. But in that moment, all I knew was that the world I had built, my marriage, my family, even my role at the company, had been stripped away. "You're no longer part of our company," the board had said earlier that week. I wasn't just starting over. I was standing in the wreckage. I sat there in the boardroom, completely still, letting their words settle in like slow poison. Deep down, I'd known this was coming, I'd felt it brewing for weeks, but that didn't soften the blow. It didn't ease the tight ache spreading through my chest. Everything I had helped build with them, gone in an instant. The years I had poured into the company, the sacrifices I'd made, the late nights, the hard conversations, they were all being erased piece by piece. "So that's what this is really about," I finally said, my voice quiet but firm. I lifted my eyes and met theirs. "You just want to cut me out. Strip me of what's left." My father leaned back, arms crossed, his face set in stone. "You've become a liability, John," he said flatly. "It's not personal. It's survival." Ted didn't even try to speak. He just turned and walked out of the room like a man who'd already closed the door in his heart. "You made the right choice," my father said on his way out. "Sometimes the best thing you can do is admit you've lost. It saves you from worse." I didn't respond. I didn't care anymore. A few hours later, they released me from the station. I stepped out into the cool evening air, feeling nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Just a strange, suffocating hollowness. Everything was gone. My marriage. My job. My name on the company I helped raise from the ground up. I got home late, the sky already soaked in twilight. Linda was in the kitchen, sitting quietly with a mug of tea. She looked up when I walked in, her expression soft, not prying. We didn't say much that night. But somehow, that silence was easier to carry than the storm I'd left behind. In the days that followed, I filed for divorce. It moved quickly, almost too easily. Catherine didn't contest anything. I think her decision had been made long before mine ever reached paper. The judge signed the paperwork in a matter of minutes. The house stayed with me, some strange, empty monument to the life I thought I had. Catherine took the children. And then not long after, word reached me that she'd married Ted. I didn't feel rage. I didn't even feel heartbreak. Just the same echoing emptiness. The world I'd once lived in had completely crumbled, and I was just learning how to stand in the ashes. But somehow the silence in the house began to shift. Linda stayed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the quiet began to change. There was warmth in the kitchen again. Music sometimes played from the old radio. She brought life back into the rooms without forcing anything. We started talking more. And not always about the pain. She never pressed, never demanded answers I wasn't ready to give. She had this way of listening that didn't need words. And that alone, just knowing someone heard me, meant more than I could have imagined. In return, I gave her space. I offered her safety and maybe a little bit of hope. We weren't rushing into anything. It wasn't about filling holes or replacing what had been lost. It was about surviving. And slowly beginning again. One evening we were in the study, a place once filled with weight and sorrow. I poured myself a glass of whiskey. She sat across from me, legs tucked up, flipping through a book. The warmth of the lamp painted soft shadows on the walls. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a man drowning. I felt like someone trying to breathe again. Eventually, I had to ask myself the one question I'd been avoiding for too long. What now? I couldn't keep living in that hollow space, circling the same memories, drowning in what I'd lost. That wasn't living, it was just surviving. And I was done with that. One night, sitting across from Linda in the quiet kitchen, I said it out loud for the first time. I'm going to build a company, I told her, my voice steady. One that will rival, and eventually bury, my father and brother's business. She blinked, caught off guard by the sudden conviction in my tone. But then she gave a small nod. If you need help, I'm with you. That was the first real smile I'd felt in a long time. Thank you, I said, meaning every word. I'm going to need all the support I can get. The days blurred together after that. Starting something from nothing was brutal. The long hours, the rejections, the money that never seemed to stretch far enough. But I had one thing they didn't: experience. I knew the market, the supply chains, the gaps my family had overlooked. And I was willing to do what they never had: adapt. And I had Linda. She didn't just stand beside me, she dove in headfirst. Helping map out growth strategies, running point on operations, learning everything as fast as I could teach her. I watched her evolve right before my eyes. She wasn't the frightened girl who had stumbled into my home all those months ago. She was sharp, dependable, fearless. After closing our first major deal, I turned to her and said, "You know, you're my right hand now. I couldn't have done this without you." She smiled, her eyes locked on mine, unwavering. We started this together. And we're going to finish it the same way. A year later, we weren't just surviving, we had a name. A presence. We were on the map. And we were just getting started. In time, our company grew into something massive. We crossed borders, expanded across continents. We became one of the biggest players in the industry. And slowly, I watched from afar as my father and brother's company faltered. Clients left. Contracts vanished. They lost the edge they once held so arrogantly. I didn't feel vindictive. No hatred. No gloating. Just quiet satisfaction. Linda and I had built something real, something lasting. Together we rose from ashes. And then, years later, they came back. They showed up in my office, aged by defeat, desperation in their eyes. My father spoke first, his voice flat but urgent. "We need your help." I leaned back in my chair, watching the man who once controlled every room he walked into. "You want me to save your company?" I asked, calm but firm. He gave a short nod. "Yes. This isn't just about us. It's about what your grandfather built. You were part of it too. You know that. You can fix this. Help us get back on our feet. A loan, an investment, anything." I studied him for a long moment. Then I offered a faint smile, but it held no warmth. "Father, you're asking me to put my money into a business that threw me out. That called me a liability. And now you want my help." He didn't answer. His fists clenched on the table, the silence stretching thick. "This isn't personal," I said, echoing the words he once used on me. "It's business. And I'm offering you a deal. Take it or watch it all fall apart. Your choice." He stared at me, and for the first time I saw it, not anger, not pride, but the quiet sting of regret. And I didn't feel victorious. I just felt done. I could see the toll it took on him, the quiet shame tucked behind clenched teeth. His pride was still fighting, but the truth was impossible to ignore. They had no other choice left. "Fine," he finally muttered, barely louder than a whisper. "We'll sign." "Good," I said, rising from my seat. "Have your lawyer here tomorrow. We'll finalize the agreement." He didn't respond. He just turned and walked out, the weight of defeat hanging off his shoulders like a worn coat. I sat back down, listening to the silence. There was no gloating in me, no smugness. Just a cold, quiet sense of resolution. I had rebuilt everything they'd taken from me, and now they knew it too. Later that night, Linda and I were sitting together, a soft evening breeze flowing through the open windows. She held her glass of wine delicately, her eyes reflecting the warm light of the room. "There must be plenty of men out there," I said, half joking, "lining up to win your heart." She smiled faintly, then glanced at me, her gaze steady. "Then why haven't I found one?" I shrugged. "Maybe you're waiting for the right one?" She took a slow sip, set her glass down, and looked at me. No games, no hesitation. "I'm waiting for you to ask," she said quietly. My breath caught. Time slowed. It wasn't a tease. There was no playfulness in her eyes, just sincerity and something deeper: love. And in that moment, everything clicked into place. The chaos, the rebuilding, the sleepless nights, it all led to this. Months later, on a bright spring day, Linda stood beside me in a simple, elegant dress, her hair loose and catching in the breeze. She was radiant. And as she walked toward me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Pure, undiluted joy. After the ceremony, we hosted dinner in the courtyard of the house that once felt so cold. Now it was alive, full of laughter, of stories, of people who meant something. Linda moved through the guests, laughing freely, and I watched her with quiet awe. I realized that I'd finally found it, my place in the world. A year after the wedding, life surprised us again. Twin girls. Two tiny miracles that filled our home with cries, giggles, and the kind of joy that steals your breath. Each morning, I would watch them sleep in the early light, and I'd feel something I hadn't in so long. Wholeness. That house, once a hollow reminder of betrayal, was warm again. Not because of bricks or light but because of them. Because of love.